Good afternoon, you lot. How are you doing? Hope you're well. Hope you can hear me. I'm Jack Chew. This is Chewing It Over. And they would say only an idiot would cover such a contentious topic with a joke in the title. And so here I am. I am that idiot. Should unvaccinated people be allowed to use roads? Of course, that's not going to be the center of what we talk about, but we will be talking about what vaccine mandate implications are, really. That's one of the big ones. Now, do let me know if you can hear me okay. I've just had some buzzing in my ear that might suggest to me that it's not. But yeah, it seems to be working all right, I think, actually. Now, we're going to try and have a discussion, explore the oohs and ahs of this subject. Let me just try and change where the caption are. It feels a bit, there's too much of it there. Let's put it on this one. That's better. Won't overlay my name. I don't know how it's going to go with regards to you guys will either join in and get stuck in live, or it'll be too contentious for you and you'll kind of be holding judgment and holding back and not really participating, which would be a shame. But I kind of understand it's a bit of a weird one, bit of a contentious issue, and therefore people might feel like they're conflicted and self-censoring. And this show might be the same. So if that's the case, don't worry about it. I've always got opinions, will travel. Happy to share my thoughts on it. But I'd prefer for it to be a live discussion. But what I know is that even if it's quiet, I know what you lot are like. You will certainly send me your opinions and we'll be able to bring them into future shows, potentially have some further guests on. I imagine this is a topic that we need to discuss more than once. It's also a topic that I have had shows. I mean, if I'd have thought on and was vaguely professional, I would be able to link in the description to previous live streams I've done about the concept of vaccine mandates and stuff, right? So theoretically, I sort of spoke about my opinions on vaccine mandates. And so that does exist. It's out there somewhere. There is a live stream about me talking about it in principle. But things are very real now, because yesterday the announcement that by April of 2022, NHS staff will need to be doubly vaccinated for COVID-19 or face losing their job. And so discussion ensues. People across all sides of that discussion. Some good, some bad, some ugly. You know, you got some people, let's go to the ugly first. You've got people that are very dismissive of each other's points of view, and that's always a shame. You've got good discussion and good points made across the piece. You've got bad points made as well. You know, you've got people that aren't necessarily being ugly and dismissive, but they are also, the minute you think something like this is an absolute no-brainer, you're probably missing something, right? The fact that they've got smart and thoughtful people across various different parts of a spectrum on an opinion like this, if you're then looking at it and just being like, this is the easiest decision in the world, right? This is just like a which hand is your right hand, and you just, you know, it's the easiest thing. You're probably missing something, right? You're missing a strong case for the other position that you might hold, and that's a shame. That doesn't mean that I end up sitting perfectly on the fence on this, right? You'll see in a second. I will explain my take, but it does mean that if you're looking at it and just thinking like, oh, there's nothing but stupid opinions one side of me, then I think you're mistaken, right? It speaks quite closely to the heart of where people have different sort of baseline epistemologies. They just go about things in a different way. They see the world differently. They have a different relationship with the state. They have a different relationship with medicine. They have varying degrees as to how that intersects with their politics. And that's why people find topics like this to be strange, is because to someone, they look at it and just be like, well, that's the easiest answer in the world. And to someone else, they have a similar feeling of being like, oh, that's easy, that's simple. But they then end up on a different position. And unfortunately, that can happen within friendships, within households, within workplaces. And this is where it really does intersect with work, doesn't it? Where you might have close friends that you don't necessarily need to get into the weeds on on your thoughts, feelings, and politics necessarily on a regular, but this stuff will matter, right? I imagine that there will be people that are of strong opinions on this either way, and it will come into the staff room. Maybe still socially distanced staff rooms in the NHS, but also it has cultural implications beyond that, doesn't it? And so, to my silly title, I really am being tongue in cheek, of course, but the point is that will that then go beyond the NHS? Will there be other implications? Will there be, you've got to be vaccinated to go into a public library. You've got to be vaccinated to go into a let's say it's in London, a tube station, something like that. More feasible than roads, of course. But kind of what I'm being cheeky about is that you do end up inviting the idea that there's going to be a two-tier system there, isn't there? Right, vaccinated versus unvaccinated. What are your rights? And also, I think that what I've found interesting, and I apply this to myself as well, is that some of the strongest opinions about where people land on this come from people that you wouldn't necessarily be doing it in a self-interested manner. Some of the strongest opinions against vaccine mandates are from vaccinated people. Some of the strongest, less common, but you do have some people that are really sympathetic to vaccine mandates, even though they themselves aren't vaccinated for whatever reason. Rarer that, granted. But, self-interest and other motivations like that, I think sometimes play a part, but they're not all of it. And so let's discuss and chew that over together. Thank you for those that are commenting already. If you are going to comment, and I really do encourage that, of course, I'd love to hear from you. Please keep your comments. I mean, obviously, your thoughts might want to be unpacked, and you might want to write me a little essay, and I will read it. In fact, I'll read it on air if we can. But if you can, just put it in little chunks, right? Press enter occasionally so that I can pull it up on screen. So, for example, top marks to Till, who has said, if I think this is a no-brainer, I'm missing something. I love this. Right, that's nice of you. Thanks, Till. Of course, some things are a no-brainer, but this isn't, or you can't be too dismissive of it, I think. But that's a great example of a question that is small enough for me to pull it up on screen. Liz Cowan, unfortunately, Liz, it means I can't necessarily see all of your comments. So I end up having to read half of it, and then half of it I struggle to read. So I've had my vaccine, and I will enable my kids to have theirs. I believe in the vaccine, but I do have two friends who have had adverse effects. One had what could be described as a nervous breakdown, absolutely no symptoms prior to vaccine, and another, let me try and read it. Another had a serious attack of transverse myelitis, no prior symptoms. There seems to be no reason for these adverse reactions. I don't think it should be mandatory. Right, brilliant. Thank you very much, Liz. And so, of course, like I say, Liz, if you're going to follow on with any comments, just press enter now and again so I can pull it up all up on screen, because I obviously would love to have you in the discussion. It's absolutely brilliant, especially what she said there. So let's just reflect on what Liz has said. So she's had a vaccine and she'll enable her kids to have theirs. Clearly believes in the vaccine and a fan of it. But when it comes to mandating it, she's uncomfortable, and then the reasons for that is, in part at least, contributed to by two friends of hers having had adverse effects from it, right? These aren't without risk, and whilst rare, are something that you should be bearing in mind, right? Risk-benefit analysis of a medical procedure, albeit mild and albeit a minor procedure, but it is an invasive procedure that comes with some risk. So then you end up with this risk-benefit analysis of COVID, getting COVID, and the consequences that might come of that, and the sequelae that we know about versus then the vaccine. Now, we then get into territory whereby there are vested interests in the media and in politics and amongst us. And by that, of course, I don't just mean in the media being like the mainstream media. I mean, of course, social media and the circles in which we influence each other's news feeds, but also then, the public and politics of it, and just being society at large. It's contentious. You've got some people that are invested in accentuating and implying that COVID symptoms en masse or in certain portions of a population are more deadly, right? And that there's a perception there. There's been some really good polling data done about, what percentage of the population has COVID killed so far? What is it destined to kill? And the perceptual difference there is kind of where there's been some scaremongering. There's good evidence of scaremongering, especially in the media, from that. But then there's also there's another world in which, of course, you've got some people with vested interest in implying that every third vaccine that's given has quite immediate and catastrophic consequences to it or side effects to it, right? So that's where, unfortunately, you've got to cut through the noise a little bit and take most things with a pinch of salt, which turns us all into sort of cynics, which I think is a shame. But I think Liz's point has so many, it's a really classic one, really, in that people have a mixed view on this, right? Liz has had a very personal journey with that. Then, as someone who's vaccinated, but then had friends that, of course, no doubt she loves, that she's gutted to hear of their ill health from the vaccine, but then also partly contributes to her thinking that it should be choice rather than mandate. And then people say, well, it's not a mandate if it's only your job you're losing. It's like, bloody hell, it's a pretty important thing. It's your livelihood. So I think we need to be careful. Jim's asking, is it a slippery slope? My immediate reaction is, it is a no-brainer, right? Okay. Then I think about it for a little time and I start to struggle very quickly with it. Right. So Jim, tell me, what do you think it's a no? When you say first you think it's a no-brainer, what do you mean? You think it's a no-brainer that it should be mandated, or you think it's a no-brainer that it shouldn't be? Talita, thanks for joining. Talita, she says, I'm in support of vaccine, but personally struggle with being mandated. Right. Okay. Right. It's important, I think. Please do keep getting your opinions in and keep sending me your points, because I'm definitely going to be bringing you all in frequently. But it would be remiss 12 minutes in to have not spat out where my opinion is. For those that haven't seen me talk on this before, which I have done on other shows in more detail than I will do today, I am strongly opposed to vaccine mandates of any persuasion, or there being consequences for vaccinated people in terms of their legal rights to access any space. But I don't say therefore, oh, it's a no-brainer, I can't comprehend or empathize with anyone that's into that. I disagree with them, and I strongly disagree with them, but I do understand where they're coming from to some extent, right? There is something that there is an argument that people perceive whereby it's sort of to support vaccine mandates is because that's almost like a communitarian spirited thing where you're looking after the group and you're therefore being selfless to do so, and to imply that I'll vaccinate myself not in my own self-interest but for the sake of the community, and therefore to imply that to be unvaccinated or to be against vaccine mandates or to not do everything we can to create carrots and sticks to increase vaccination rates is an inherently individualistic or somehow selfish thing to do. And so I think that whilst, again, I disagree with that point of view, I think that that's where some people end up feeling. They end up feeling like, we're healthcare. I've seen people say we're healthcare professionals, therefore we should be able to appraise the evidence, and in appraising the evidence, it becomes clear that there's more risk to contracting COVID than there is to having the vaccine. Therefore, we'll do that. There's people that say that there's people that like to bring up, and I understand why, that there are vaccine mandates of a sort with Hep B, and there's vaccine mandates for yellow fever if you're going to go to a certain country. You've got I don't know if that's is that a vaccine, yellow fever? Sorry, but you have your certain medicines for certain places. So when we're talking about mandates, people will say, well, why is that not on the list? Now, there is a really relevant difference there, I think, namely that if you make a choice that going into something that you need a certain level, then the goalpost being moved isn't a small thing, right? As well as the fact that to compare the COVID vaccine with any Hep B related treatments and vaccines, or with the MMR, is disingenuous at best. I understand what you're meaning, right? It's an agent that's called a vaccine that then gets injected into your body. Of course, there's some similarities, but the implications of it and the consequences of having hepatitis versus having COVID, and how that varies depending on how it affects and infects different people, means that those differences matter, and they should influence your reasoning. In fact, it's poor reasoning to not consider that as a philosophical argument, like how is it different? That would be a shame if you were dismissive of the fact that completely. But I think as well, if you then want to imply that there's absolute parity to them, then I think that's bad thinking, bad logic, bad philosophy. Surely each disease and the at-risk groups of each disease, the consequences of it, plus then the consequences and how robustly we have the data for the actual antidote to it, and what that has and hasn't shown to be effective with, that matters, on an individual level. Now, this is the bit where I end up being, as someone that's against vaccine mandates, I don't like the fact that I end up being a bedfellow with some pretty out there views that I would not endorse. And so you've got people that are really out there conspiracy theorists, you're injecting microchips into people, etc. Irritates me no end. But I'm not necessarily on about them. The people that I'm most concerned about, which makes me a bit twitchy, is that I agree that they're on my side of it, if you call it a side, saying that things shouldn't be mandated, especially in NHS, etc. And sometimes they might share some of my views as to why not. The concerns over the fact that then become two-tier society, the fact that then some of these are completely rational concerns that the people need to make a medical opinion on their own autonomy. But, and this is a bit that I get upset about, in a way, upset's probably the wrong word, but kind of annoyed at myself that I'm in bed with some of these people, or they seem to be sharing my conclusion, is that if you are someone that thinks that despite a lack of inherent qualification to do so, you can be an armchair virologist and epidemiologist to the point in which you then end up not holding some skepticism because you've read some interesting things, but someone that's then getting into the weeds on exactly the implications of spike proteins and mRNA, as well as then the depths of epidemiology. You start to talk about the rates and change, and pretending that you know exactly what the figures have been like over the last 6 weeks in the Congo. It's just that there's this really, I'm dead suspicious of people that seem to, on this particular topic, have a capacity for knowledge as well as then an insight that goes beyond, it transcends the expertise of even those that have studied it all their lives, whilst holding down a day job, running a family, running a household, and having 3 hobbies, right? So it sounds to me that that is cherry picking. It's so unlikely that people that do that, the people that have got an answer to everything, the people that are saying, I oppose vaccine mandates, and I oppose the vaccine full stop for these reasons, and then they start to riff on talking points that they're implying is because I've done my own research and because I have this in-depth knowledge that you just clearly don't have, is deeply suspicious to me. Now, it might well be that because I've got a tiny brain and because I can't comprehend these complex things, might be the case, right? But my suspicion is that unless you are Nobel laureate style in 3 different disciplines, right? You are such a polymathic person. You are that smart. You're at the very tippy top of our IQ curve. And you just happen to then be a physiotherapist. Coincidentally, you're a community physiotherapist in the NHS, which I'm not ruling out, by the way. It just seems strange. And I think that what's happened then is you end up, your logic is being fueled by talking points, and you're convincing yourself that that is sharp intellectual rigor and reason. And I don't think it is. And therefore, you might come to a similar conclusion to me, but you will find me critiquing your mechanism of effect and being deeply suspicious about some of the rhetoric, right? Even though I will defend your right to say it, even though, as I've said, you might come to a similar conclusion on mandates to me. But that's just me planting a flag and saying, oppose mandates and pretty fiercely, but then also will not be allowing for bullshit justifications that I happen to agree with the conclusion of, just because it then supports my argument. And I think that that's something I wanted to make sure I put in place. So I'm just going to open the chat back up and see what you guys are saying. But I hope that makes sense. At least you understand my opinion. You don't have to agree with it. Please feel free to disagree with it in this next 10 minutes. But also you can come on the show and disagree with me. You can bloody host the show if you really want. We can give you the room to do so. Ollie Thompson, thank you so much for joining us. I was thinking about the show that we did together a few months back, Ollie, where it really, I've been thinking about it a lot, because it was just like the suspicion both of us had over, like, how would people know, or why would the distrust in authority being so deep that they then start to think that they can do so from a few Google searches. And epistemological arrogance is what he's saying here. And so thank you for contributing that. I totally agree. So Jim, did he end up answering the question? Oh, here we go. I want to go in order. Who had, oh, blimey, I did miss a lot of comments, didn't I? Right, sorry about this. So I had Talita's on. Jim said initially he felt that mandate was a no-brainer as the HCPs protect patients, but then mandating things is immediately a problem because of the slippery slope argument. Liz Cowan. She said, I'm in private practice. It doesn't like it's going to be mandatory for private practice. All health professionals should be treated equally. Oh, that's an interesting one. I'd never thought of that. Yeah, the inconsistencies there. I saw someone making a joke earlier about the fact that then if they mandate it in the NHS and it squeezes people out, which is definitely a social concern that we should have, is if it does end up impacting further on an already depleted workforce. But there's an argument that then the recruitment problems in private practice might be solved and we'd just have to mop up some unvaccinated workers or whatever in the private practice. So that moves it. I don't like the economics of that, but it could happen. Tiller said the issue of personal versus collective impact is a confounding factor in this. Absolutely is. And in this instance, I'm just going to put this headphone back on charge, but hopefully you guys can still hear me. Do tell me quickly if not. Yeah, for me, I really struggle to see past the fact that you should be able to consent to what you put in your body, and that, you know, as best informed consent you can get, but fundamentally it should still be your choice, yes, no. And then also then the social consequences that people are weighing, which obviously the flippant title speaks to, right? It's like slippery slope leads to them, you know, it's like you're so stupid, you're not having your vaccine. I don't care about the reasons as to why. The vaccine is this perfect divine intervention that therefore is flawless and shouldn't be questioned, and therefore really you shouldn't use the roads. You know, you can build your own roads. That is kind of a drama that of course isn't going to ensue, but it's just that logic does trickle down. Let me go further down. Talita said, I understand the reasons behind both sides of the argument, but feel it's too early to make it mandatory for your job. Yeah, I mean, the speed of it is definitely relevant. Alison has said, should this even be discussed? Unvaccinated people have their reasons. They may have had the virus and hold natural immunity. They may have medical reasons. They're not putting anyone at risk. You can still catch and pass on the virus whilst fully vaccinated. What else did she say? Sorry. Oh, no, that was it. Sorry. Cheers, Alison. It gave me a ... didn't it? But that's just for the rest of that word. So, yeah, let me go through those things one by one. Should this even be discussed? Now, if you're referring to the title of my live stream, don't worry, it's tongue in cheek, right? Of course, the reason I'm saying that is because I'm exaggerating that argument to say, and satirizing it in a way to say, of course, unvaccinated we should be allowed to use roads, and we wouldn't do that, would we? Or some people would, no doubt, but it'd feel a bit extreme. But I'm kind of making a case that's the slippery slope we could end up going towards, right? What services could or couldn't people do if you end up two-tiering society like that? So if that's what you're meaning, then of course, don't worry, I'm not actually seriously discussing whether or not they should. If you're saying, should this even be discussed because you think it's a bit improper for us to discuss this thing, it's like, that's unfortunately tough shit, and that's what I do. That's what this show's for, is to discuss whatever's topical, and so that's what we're doing. Unvaccinated people have their reasons. They may have had the virus and hold natural immunity. Let me just stop and pause on that. That's one of the key reasons, really. If you think about the natural immunity is shown to be stronger and more powerful than the vaccine, which... you know, that begs a question. I always like hypotheticals. Like if I'd have had COVID and I'd have had antibody tests that suggested that I was holding, you know, antibodies in excess of what my vaccinated colleague would be, then would I have had vaccine? I don't know. I don't think I would. I'd be very surprised if I would. If I'd have had COVID and had a fair reaction enough to it to be confident of having had antibodies, had an antibody test or whatever that then showed that I was immune or was more immune than my vaccinated colleagues. I then have had, similar to Liz, I've had some friends that have had some bad reactions to it, some of them transient, fortunately, but, you know, it's really disrupted their physiology, their ability to exercise for a period of time. But I've also had plenty of friends as well that have had COVID and it's really disrupted them and it's been quite serious. Not death-defying serious, but definitely in a way disruptive in a similar effect to their physiology. But I think in that instance, it's just like you end up, there's still a risk-benefit analysis and it still needs to be on me to make that decision. Now, then of course it's not that I'm then going to be shot if I don't. This is about work. But I suppose, the NHS might not want anything to do with me in the future. But if I did want to go and work in the NHS, I've enjoyed my time working in the NHS. I could go back into it anytime. The fact that I wouldn't be able to, I think is a I don't know. I think that's as much of a loss to the NHS as it is to me. I mean, I don't like the fact that my freedom and my opportunities being curtailed like that. But above all else, I think that's a miss. I hope they would miss out on me and people like me in that work pool. I think is a shame. And then Alison talked a bit about the mechanism, the fact that you can cash and pass it on while vaccinated and stuff. I think you should factor into your reasoning as well. So the next thing that was said there is, would mandating new starters in the NHS be okay? I think it's easier. If you're a bit harsh on those that are qualifying at the moment, but say if you were planning your career at the moment and you knew that, right, I want to go into X and it requires this, and you knew that going into it full well, like I did when I go into, I'm going to be a physio, right? And when I get to the point in which I need to go into hospitals, I'll need to have these certain vaccines or be tested to make sure I've got antibodies for X, which is a key difference as well, isn't it? Right? It's not people saying we just need you to be immune. But I think that that is something that is a different decision than mandating it once someone is in post and in the role. And I think that's certainly a concern of mine. So yeah, I think in this instance, I suspect that that's what they're going to do. I think Liz replied to Jack here and said, if it is to be mandated, then it should be for everyone. I don't think it should be mandated for anyone. Yeah, so sorry, that was a follow-up, I guess, to because Liz had made a good point about how you're gonna not just two-tier society, you're also gonna two-tier healthcare professionals then, aren't you? Liz was saying about the fact that healthcare professionals should be treated the same regardless of what sector of which they work in, and this is going to be an obvious difference. And I think that it concerns me, like if you get, people will make the slippery slope argument sometimes too much, but one of the things that that I think is going to happen is you will start to get businesses and services that will treat vaccinated people and serve vaccinated people. You've got some that will treat both and serve both, and you've got some that will start to go the other way and say, right, we are identifying ourselves as the people of the unvaccinated. We're gonna make a point of discriminating the other way. Bold move, of course, it'd be. But they could, and I just don't like that. I don't like that in many ways. I just don't think it's a good optic for us to separate ourselves. And I also just don't think that separating ourselves or delineating it like that is a good idea. There's some I find it really interesting politically. You've got people that are of a say leftist ideological persuasion in the most part, then start saying, well, it's a private business, they can do what they want. It's like suddenly you get people find their libertarian streak when it suits them, and similarly you've got people that are then championing sort of community spirited values against their usual rhetoric of freedom when it suits them, or there is like a selfish individualism that can exist at both extremes of the political spectrum. Of course, it can exist everywhere, but I'm just meaning like baked into the ideology. And so you get people that 1 second are talking about their individual rights to everything, from how they would like to police language and define themselves on a very hyper individualized level, then starting to imply that public health, all for one for all, individual freedom's irrelevant. It's just like people aren't noticing their own hypocrisies on their politics, which I think is a shame. Till has said here, especially here in the US, sorry, Till, I didn't know you were joining us from the US, so thanks for that. We have no societal consensus on the credibility of sources. Yeah, definitely not something I'm going to do in the last minute of this show. I'm sorry we've run out of time, but it is a massive one, that, isn't it? Like we've just got massive issues with our institutional trust, haven't we? What are we going to do about that? That's the media, but also the academy, and in terms of where we might get and translate knowledge and trusted public figures and stuff. It's just like it's hard, isn't it? And unfortunately, yeah, I'm deeply scared. I think what I've always said is that unfortunately the incoherence that has occurred over recent years, regardless of what I did or don't agree with, the incoherence of it has been massively irritating. And so, yeah, I'm massively distrusting of authority, which I've always had a bit of a bent for anyway. But certainly, it's fewer and farther between to try and find someone that's got a credibility or some sort of authority or source that you can therefore allow for a vouch that makes you then, in this case, have a medical intervention that you might not want. And so it's a bit coercive, isn't it? Which I think is a shame. So yeah, that's my take on the matter. Key opinion from me being that I'm against vaccine mandates, and in fact strongly so, but also that I don't like the fact that I don't like my bedfellows on some of that. Really is a bit annoying. Some of the madcap characters that you end up being on the same conclusion of, but it doesn't mean that I will justify their either tactics or their rhetoric on all of this. What I don't like, though, is on the other side of that, whereby people who are into it, who feel that actually if the mandate's not strong enough and that they might be so extreme that they might actually be implying that unvaccinated people shouldn't use roads or other public services, that's you definitely want to read into some. You really want to read into some Stalinist history. If you think that there's no bottom to that logic, then certainly well worth. I can signpost you to a bit of literature on that, because that's a worrying little authoritarian streak you might have. So I've not got a lot of time for that. I'm fortunate to have not got friends and people close to me that are not discussing and debating this sensibly and aren't at those extremes. But when you do encounter them, careful not to waste too much of your time with people that are completely mental on this topic. It's not going to get you anywhere, and it's not going to get us all anywhere. It's something that we want to discuss it and debate it, and the conclusions matter, and where we end up matters. And you'll see me getting stronger in my opposition to it if things don't change. But generally speaking, when it comes to discussion and conversation, and just not exhausting yourself on professional channels, then just be mindful. I'd be gutted if you're burnt out and had less energy for our other common causes in MSK and in trying to raise standards across education. So for now, that's enough from me. We're out of time. Really appreciate you. Thanks for joining the discussion. Thanks for those that have been watching in and not contributing. I know what you like. You'll probably tell me and share your thoughts afterwards, and I'd love to hear from them. But especially if you're someone that'd like you put yourself forward for us to have a bit of a chat about it on air, I always prefer that, to have a bit of a talk show format. So we will make time for this conversation to carry on, and I do invite your comments so that you can contribute to future episodes. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a lovely day. I'll see you tomorrow.